Hey, how's it going? Good to see you all again. Thanks for tuning back in. If you're new here, welcome. It's great to meet you. My name's Ben, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about how I tried and failed to become a digital nomad living in Thailand. Those of you new to this channel, like I just said, my name's Ben. I've been living in Thailand for around 5 years. I'm still here. I'm sat here currently. The majority of that time, I've been working as an English teacher in schools here in Thailand. However, I did try for a brief spell. I did take the leap of faith, and I did try to become a digital nomad. A pretty popular buzzword, I guess, digital nomad. Typically, it means you're part of the new laptop class who works remotely and gets to sort of travel around and work online and all that good stuff. You know, you've probably seen pictures of it or adverts or Instagram posts of a guy with his laptop on the beach sipping a margarita. That's definitely the lifestyle I wanted and what I shot for, but it didn't work out for me. I'm back working in schools. I'm not too unhappy about that, but I did want to talk today about some of the reasons why it failed for me, and maybe you can learn from some of those mistakes I made. Maybe I can share some sort of real world experiences that I had that perhaps you're not considering. So yeah, maybe this will be of some use to you. It definitely was of use to me to reflect on that failure, because I still would in the future love to be working remotely. I'd still love that kind of digital nomad life of some kind. I've broken my failure down into 5 points. The first one being the visa, the second cost of living, the third was work-life balance, then a change in law in China that affected me. And finally, I guess I was unskilled and unprepared for the reality of being a digital nomad. So first up, let's talk about the visa. So the first thing I realized when trying to become a digital nomad here in Thailand is that Thailand doesn't really have, or doesn't strictly have, or didn't at the time when I tried, it didn't have a digital nomad visa per se on offer. So that was something that was extremely difficult, probably one of the biggest barriers to entry to sort of living that lifestyle out here. I know that I've heard from people who work in Vietnam, there used to be, although this has changed again, but there used to be a really good long-term visa option available sort of for digital nomads over there, or I believe that is true. It's kind of difficult to find the right visa that would enable you to work as a digital nomad in Thailand. Like I said, there isn't strictly one available. Typically the long-term visa options that are accessible to most people would be like the education visa. Again, that's sort of been, it's not too great because it's been reduced to only a year in length now. The marriage visa, obviously that's only for a certain amount of people, and the retirement visa, once again, that for people over the age of 50 who meet the financial restrictions. So all of those long-term visas that are accessible. Now there are some elite visas in Thailand. There are some very good solid visas that will give you working privileges and a lot more, but they were way out of my price range, very unaffordable for the majority of people, I think. So the visas that were accessible to most people, the education visa, the marriage visa, the retirement visa, so yeah, they might not be perfect for everyone, and it's definitely not perfect for being a digital nomad, I wouldn't say. I think the root of this problem comes down to the fact that visas were invented a long time ago, way before people were working remotely online. So if you were to work in a country, say if you wanted to come to Thailand and get the working visa, it would mean that you were employed by a Thai company, a Thai school, Thai organization, and you were working at a physical location here in the Kingdom of Thailand. And that's kind of how the visa and the work permit system seems to be set up to accommodate for, which makes perfect sense. I imagine that's pretty typical around the world. I know a few countries are now offering sort of more digital nomad or remote worker visa options, but right now that isn't available right here. But that does bring up a real sort of question. If you're sat in a workspace or a cafe in Chiang Mai here in Thailand, you're employed by a Japanese company to do some digital artwork, perhaps. Let's say you're a graphic designer, so you're sat in Thailand, you're on your computer working for a Japanese client, producing digital artwork or logos for them, and you're being paid in American dollars. So where exactly do you work? That's an interesting sort of problem that's kind of emerged. Do you work in Thailand where you're physically sat? Are you working in Japan where you're doing the work for a company based there? And obviously you're being paid in a third currency just to complicate matters further. So yeah, getting a visa and having like the work permit is pretty tricky. It's pretty difficult place to navigate. And it's not legal to work in Thailand without a work permit. And it's not going to be easy for you to get a work permit if you're working online, especially if you're doing something creative or something like that, and you're living as a digital nomad. So this does raise an interesting question that you might not even be able to legally work here in the Kingdom of Thailand. It seems to depend what you're doing. I found an interesting article on thethaembassy.com, so we'll jump over there now and have a look at that. I will leave a link to this website in the description of this video if you want to check it out for yourself. So on a digital nomad working in Thailand on thaembassy.com, in order to work in the kingdom, a foreigner needs to be on an appropriate visa and obtain a work permit and pay taxes. But then it says, but what is work? And if we scroll down here to typical cases of digital nomads and foreigners working in Thailand, it gives a few scenarios and tells you if they're legal or if they're not legal, which is kind of interesting because the line, the area is a very big grey area. It's not strictly black and white. So the first scenario it gives is a digital nomad works on his online shop in a co-working space. So the answer to whether that is legal is the digital nomad is allowed to manage his online shop during the duration of his stay in Thailand without a work permit. Even if some of his customers are in Thailand, he is just continuing to do something he was doing before he came to Thailand anyway. However, if his products or market are mainly from Thailand, then yes, this is considered to be work and is a concern. So even within this scenario, it's not 100% clear. If your operations are majority outside of Thailand, it seems like it will be fine. However, if you were selling Thai goods to a majority Thai market, then perhaps this would be an issue once again. Another example it gives, a website developer offers his services to fellow digital nomads in Thailand. Yes, this clearly works as he should get a work permit for it. This job could have been done by a Thai website designer. The foreigner is competing with Thai workers and so he needs a work permit. And let's just have a look at one more. So a foreigner sits in his apartment and teaches Chinese students online via Skype. Officially, it is work, however, it is not the main concern right now. So the authorities allow the foreigner to do this without a work permit. In this case, it will be a matter of scale of the work and the environment. So, as you can see, it's pretty confusing, but it seems to be if you're competing with Thai businesses, if you're taking jobs of potential Thai workers, then it seems like it would be you would need a work permit for that. So being a digital nomad in that realm, in some of those examples given, like buying and selling and exporting Thai products, that one seems pretty obvious to me because you're sort of buying physical objects and it's like more of a traditional exporting career. Running an online shop also, like that seems to make sense that would be okay as long as you're not predominantly in the market. But yeah, you can see like the confusion. So if you were teaching Chinese students online, teaching them English, then where does that leave you? It says that's legal, so you're allowed to do that because you're not strictly taking jobs away from Thai citizens doing that, and you're not you're not really involved at all in the sort of workforce in Thailand, are you? If you're working for a Chinese company teaching English, so it's kind of operating outside in different countries. But needless to say, this is all really confusing, and it isn't black and white. You do have to do your own research to figure out if what you're doing while you're staying in Thailand is legal for you to be doing so without a work permit. There are also a lot of restrictions on certain industries in Thailand. So yeah, the whole visa and work permit factor is like an absolute minefield to try and navigate. And this was, looking back, one of the more crucial sort of factors on why it didn't really work out for me as well. The next thing I found, the next reason for me why I failed as a digital nomad, was the cost of living. So before I took my shot at being a digital nomad, I was living in northeastern Thailand, which is a very reasonable place to live indeed. There's not many tourists up there, so yeah, living cost is pretty low. It's very, very affordable. Beautiful part of the world, definitely go if you can. I absolutely loved it up there and miss it a lot. I still don't live there, unfortunately. I'm very fond of that area because it was like the first place I lived in Thailand when I first got my first teaching job at a school up there. But to get sort of visas more easily that were applicable to non-workers, it's very difficult to get a visa in those rural areas, so you kind of have to move to sort of an area where there's a lot of foreigners, a lot of expats, a lot of people doing a few different things. Some of the visas, like the education visa, is extremely difficult to get outside of the sort of bigger areas like Bangkok, Samui, Phuket, Chiang Mai. Those areas are okay, but if you go outside of those areas, it becomes very difficult indeed to get certain visas. So that's what I did. It's also what I wanted to do. I wanted to move to a sort of, like I said, I had that image of someone being sat on the beach, sipping a margarita and working online, that's what being a digital nomad was to me at the time. How wrong I was. But yeah, so I ended up moving to Koh Samui, which is an island here in South Thailand. Beautiful place. I was very happy there. But one big thing was the cost of living was a big jump to me. Now, if you're moving from a Western country, you'll probably still find that it's a reduction in your cost of living, even living in a relatively expensive area or province in Thailand, which you may have to do if you're wanting to be a digital nomad, because you probably need the sort of services, infrastructure, and that you'll need to be living in an area where certain visas are available. So you're probably in one of those sort of hotspots for kind of expats and digital nomads. So you may find that it isn't as cheap as you might have been expecting. It was a massive issue for me because I was moving from somewhere that was much more reasonable, and I was all of a sudden I was in an area where it was very more expensive, and I'd also incurred more costs. So it wasn't just that the living was expensive. My new visa was very expensive. Once again, when I was working in a school, the visa fees were covered. When I was a digital nomad, I had to pay them myself, obviously. They were a lot more than I was expecting. So this was also a big problem for me, and one of the main reasons why I failed as being a digital nomad. Also, on top of visas and an increase in cost of living, I also found that my work-life balance was completely thrown off and became a little bit unbearable for a time being. So like I mentioned, my cost of living had increased. I was paying twice as much for rent in Samui as I was in northeastern Thailand. Food was more expensive. Gas was more expensive, everything was more expensive. Like my condo, like I just said, was twice as much as it used to be. The visa I was now having to pay for, and that was a real tricky thing that took up a lot more of my time managing, and it also cost a lot more because I didn't have a school that I didn't have a company or anything that was employing me. So that was all those costs were now on me, whereas before the school covered the cost of my visa. And to be perfectly and brutally honest, I was actually making a lot less than I expected. I thought I'd be making more working for myself online than I did at the school, but in fact I made a lot less. So I had all these extra costs and I was now making less money. Obviously that meant I had to increase my hours a lot to try and make up some extra money. So I found I was working all the evenings, I found I was working weekends. My social life just completely deteriorated and crumbled around me. The times when my work was needed typically were in the evenings and weekends, so I couldn't get the time off that I would usually, and like it was very difficult to meet people. I quickly became very isolated because I was always working in the evenings. I'd work pretty much all day. I'd have like a break in the middle of the day, so I had to wake up really early, work. There'd be like a break in the middle of the day. I had to work in the evenings, to work at the weekends. My days off became like Mondays or Tuesdays. It was really awkward. It was really uncomfortable. I didn't like it at all. And it was, I lost a lot of time that I could have been out socially. My social life just really disappeared in this period of my life. And it was completely unsustainable for me because I had to wake up early and sleep late, sort of have a break in the middle of the day. It just didn't fit me personally. So it was, a very difficult thing to manage was the sort of work-life balance when I was working for myself and under increased pressures, and things weren't going quite as well as I had planned. Another factor that really hit me, which I really couldn't have foreseen, I really couldn't have planned for, was a change in Chinese law. So to tell you the truth, like I said, I'm a teacher by trade, so I've been working in schools. I started to teach online. I was employed by a Chinese company and I was tutoring people in China how to speak English. And something pretty remarkable happened actually. This was during sort of the pandemic as well. China changed its legislation massively. There was a massive cultural shift in laws, and all of a sudden for people under 18 it was illegal to get extra English classes outside of school hours. So this meant that if you were a student in China, or if you were the parent of a student in China, you weren't allowed to put that student in extra English classes outside of the school hours, and that is the majority of the work for people tutoring online. Yeah, there were these new laws. It was about unfair advantages for the students who could afford these extra English classes, so that was sort of went against the communist ethos, I guess, of China. They also put restrictions on how much time young people could play video games and go online. So once again, it was these kind of cultural and sort of communist flavored sort of shifts in legislation in China meant that pretty much overnight the amount of students was like cut in half, if not more. By far and away the most people were young students who wanted to study English or whose parents were putting them in for English classes online. After this happened, there was only like the adult classes, which were a lot less. I didn't like them as much because my experience has always been in like primary school, so it was a lot more challenging for me. And there was a ton of less work. You know, this wasn't something that I could have predicted. I don't feel like this was something that was my fault, but it was a huge factor in why everything sort of fell apart for me when I was trying to become a digital nomad. So even though there is a very, very little chance that this would happen again or happen for you, it is something to bear in mind that the unthinkable or the unforeseeable could happen and really disrupt the work that you're trying to do. Ultimately, I was unskilled and unprepared to become a digital nomad. So I think this is what the key factor that it sort of boils down to, is that I wasn't prepared, I was unskilled, I didn't have the skills required. I'm not a computer programmer. Perhaps I would have been all right if I was doing something like that. And yeah, I was unprepared. I didn't have a backup plan for when things start to fall apart. I hadn't planned my finances well enough. I didn't put enough research into how much the cost of living would be. I didn't put enough research into what the visa options were and how expensive they would be. So all of those things combined, ultimately it was my fault. I was definitely underskilled and underprepared, sadly. I do look back very fondly at my time in Koh Samui, sort of living as a digital nomad, even though it was completely unsustainable for me and so came to an abrupt end before it even really took off. But yeah, perhaps I can learn from this, and perhaps in the future I can make a better plan and have another crack at it. If you're wondering about the visa options for you, if you want to stay long term in Thailand, I did make a video briefly about that not too long ago, so I'll leave a link to that video right here. So yeah, click the box there. It should be on your screen now to see that video if you want to stay in Thailand long term.